Hello, and welcome to what is the opening of Washington Treaty Issues. And when I say opening, I mean it's probably going to turn into a bit of a series of me looking at the various naval treaties. In fact, it might actually be something which I do a series of to cover while I'm wandering around at Easter time. So, this is going to be a mixture today, in that I'm going to both show you what might have been possible in terms of the American and the Japanese navies, because I've already done a video which was based around what the Royal Navy could have had for roughly 42,000 tons in standard, and honestly it's not that dissimilar to what I'm going to propose today, because I've been thinking this through in trying to work it through in accuracy and trying to work through what the requirements were. And the whole reason for doing this and doing this kind of work is you need to have a base point to work out what would have been an equitable treaty. The reason we can say this wasn't an equitable treaty is pretty much everyone goes away upset, but also everyone goes away knowing that they are going to be building compromised ships. And they know they're going to be building compromised ships because they know what the ships were they were building. And that's the real problem with this treaty. Everyone has designs of ships they're building or are in service in the case of HMS Hood, which are bigger than the treaty. So you know that it's not what you should be building at the time. You know, yeah, it's basically something. Yes, we can build a ship 35,000 tons with 16-inch guns. Yes, we can. But it's kind of like the decision made on the cruisers, and the more I look into this treaty, the more I sort of get into the various facets of it. And that's actually might be what I have come to cover while I'm away for Easter on the days when I'm not going to be able to do videos because I'm looking after students, looking at the various other facets of the Washington Treaty and the points at which they have run into issues. The Washington Treaty on capital ships starts to set the standard, 35,000 tons. 16-inch guns. There's nothing wrong with 16-inch guns. That's fine. In fact, honestly, again, you could point out the Royal Navy had an 18-inch gun in service, but it hadn't been on a battleship. And really, HMS Furious had one gun fitted on her at one point, and she'd always been a bit weird, and everyone was prepared to ignore her, and frankly, ignoring her makes a lot of sense. But let's look at a ratio. 553 1.75. Is it me or is that a contrived ratio? Think about it. You're automatically saying, oh well, yeah, the Marine Nationale and the Regia Marina, they're never going to be able to build their full quota in 35,000 ton ships. They just can't. They can't build whole numbers of ships. They cannot build whole numbers of ships. Think about that. Because the Royal Navy's allowed, and the US Navy are allowed 15 ships each. That's roughly what's agreed. Right? 15 ships. Okay. That means the IJN's allowed 9 ships. And that means the Marine Nationale and the Regia Marina are allowed 3 times 1.75. Now, by my count, that is 5.25. Let's figure that out again, because it's 3 times 0.75. Okay, 0.75 plus 0.75 is 1.5, plus another 0.75 on is 2.25. Okay, 2.25 plus 3 is 5.25. No, I am not repeating the caliber of the Dido gun for random reasons. That is literally what is worked out. At what point is that an equitable treaty? That you have said that France and Italy they're allowed 5 1/4 ships. Which quarter do they pick? I'd like to know that one. Which quarter do you pick of a ship do you build? Oh yes, I'm going to build the aft quarter. Or forward. Dunkirks make a lot of sense in that scenario. Okay, superiority. RN US are equal, but both have to have a 6-ship superiority over IJN for force of 15, 15, 9, 5, and 5 with remainder. That's I've done a little R sign there for a remainder because they have a remainder of 0.25 ships. You can't transfer it to your cruiser allowance. There is absolutely no point. But the reason they have to do that is because the only way they can keep the IJN at 3 is if they keep them at 1.75. That is the only way they can do that. Because otherwise they have to give the IJN more. And to be honest, the Marine Nationale and Reggio Marina do not care what they get allowance. They're not going to be building up anything anytime soon. The French economy can't deal with it, and the Italians don't want to. They collectively represent the lowest numbers able to be got. The people who are pushing the treaty, who believe peace was able to be achieved only with a very strict squeezing the naval pips till the naval oranges till their pipsqueak, let alone the German lemons, would guarantee peace. Of course it didn't. We'll get into that. But it didn't. And it wasn't going to because of the way it was achieved. You know, before you get into anything, 35,000 tons. We talked about how that ratio, and here it is. Here's a good example. The South Dakotas, 43,200 tons fully loaded. The Kiis class, 41,900, well, 42,600 tons fully loaded. The Hood, 46,680 long tons, or 47,429 tons. Displacement standard, 41,200 tons. Long tons. 8 15-inch guns, 12 16-inch guns in 4 triple turrets, 10 15-inch guns, different speeds, battle cruiser, battleships, 4 planned, 3 cancel planned treaties, 6 planned. This is what's being planned. So everyone knows what level is appropriate for a battleship or a battle cruiser you're building at this point at the time. You're talking roughly 40,000 tons in standard, aren't you? You're talking, let's say, 42,000 tons in standard. Because that's equitable. That's what people are building. If you look, when you talk about the cruiser, what do? They take the largest light cruiser the Royal Navy's building. Let's be honest, the Hawkins class are light cruisers, and go, okay, right, and they're going to be here. We'll make the treaty limit 10,000 tons, which is more than they are. We'll make the treaty, they're getting 7.5-inch guns. We're going to put 8-inch guns to the treaty limit. So you make the treaty limit something you can build up to, which makes sense. And why does it make sense? Because it means people feel they can build. It means they can feel secure and safe. And that's the trouble. You have a treaty system which sets up where Japan, and you know what's the worst is America knows this. And they know this, but they want to make Japan feel, they want to make sure they are strong enough that Japan knows they're stronger than them. So they want a 5-3 ratio rather than a 10-7 ratio. And that's great. But that's basically guaranteeing your opponent, your likely person across the sea, who you already have a bit of an interesting relationship with, is going to be scared of you because you are so much more powerful than them. So they are constantly going to be looking at you through fear goggles. If They are staring at you through fear goggles because you have not allowed them the strength to feel safe. They're not going to win in a fight 10 versus 7. You're still going to win. You're still America. You've got all the infrastructure and everything else. Yes, they might stand more of a chance. They might, but you're still going to win. So what would have been an equitable treaty? Using the precedent of how the cruiser standards were decided upon, and these, remember, are basically how they convert light cruiser into a heavy cruiser, but we'll leave that to one side for a moment. That is something for a future video. The whole cruiser shabackle, we will get into that. Newest ship in service is HMS Hood. Standard displacement is listed at the time of treaty is 41,200 tons. Based on precedents of rounding up onto the 10,000 ton limit, 42,000 tons. Boom, there you go. There's your standard limit. It's fair. This is the ship in service. Everyone can fit. Honestly, you could probably get a South Dakota through on 42,000 tons of standard displacement. You could probably get a Dakota class through and have the 12 16-inch guns, which would be a lovely ship. It would be slow compared to what the British would build, but it would be lovely. You could probably even build the Kiis as well. Definitely build them. Because of the Colorado class, they're the largest guns in service with 16-inch guns. 16-inch guns, down. I've agreed this. It's fine, it's fair. Fair ratio. Japan requested a 7-10 ratio rather than the 3-5, as that would allow just enough strength to make victory less than certain should one of the larger powers choose to attack them. So, I went through and I went, right, well, if I'm basically doubling the numbers here up for the ratios, oh, I've now got to make it 3.5 for the Japanese, for the French and the Italians, which would actually have made it up to 7. But I hated it at 1.75, so I've made it 4. But it could be 3.5. They're prepared to accept 1.75, double it to make it 3.5. But I feel if you're adding on to the Japanese and making theirs 7, you can afford to push up the French and Italians to 4 each. And for the French, this makes sense because then they can keep, they will have parity with the Italians, but we're not with 8 ships in service. That's a fine fleet number, and there's other reasons for this. To retain a 6-ship superiority, we end up with the RN in USN having 20 ships, the IJN having 40, Marine Nationale and the Regia Marina having 8. So we also have given the IJN a 6-ship superiority over Marine Nationale and the Regia Marina, which will make them feel even more secure and safe. Now, it's not necessarily good because I'm not claiming that Japan becomes suddenly nice people and they don't start going on the war rage. But here's the thing. If Japan feels confident in its naval power, doesn't feel that it's been slighted by the other major powers and has been treated with respect, and is able to build within limits a fleet. And this whole point of my treaty is that it's rather than it being a blanket no construction for anyone, it's more a case of control construction for everyone. So you can construct, but there are limits on what you on how much and what you can construct at any one point. Then that's better, because it allows everyone to keep their industry going to an extent, but it also, more importantly, means no one feels like they have bad ships. No one feels hard done by. No one feels like they lost everything and they got something else. They all feel like they get something. So this all creates an obvious problem. In a world of 16-inch gunned, 42,000-ton ships, 20,000-ton, 12-inch and 13.5-inch ships are not going to be good. In fact, they'll be death traps. They will be, let's be honest. So rather like as was proposed for Italy and France and Italy, replacement be phased. This will prevent a naval arms race, but also allow nations to feel powerful, still, and like they could respond to circumstance, i.e., we are all building our own new ships. And it almost becomes a challenge of who can get the best out of this limit. And it's a practical limit. This is going to sound strange. Setting up a 35,000-ton limit means automatically you're going to cheat. The Royal Navy cheated. Water as armour, remember? All sorts of different things put into the Nelson or Romney class, which frankly are cheats. There is one of a couple of my viewers, 96831, Martin Peacock, those and several other commentators. And I'm never quite sure of a video if you're supposed to mention your commentators or not, but I do. They comment a lot. They're lovely people. Are both very focused in on the details of these ships, and they like to tell me that, you know, nice everyone likes to go, they're lying. These figures don't exist. Well, that's true. But if everyone in a treaty has to lie to make their ships fit the treaty, then the treaty's already failed. First rule of first guideline I always give to people if they're setting up any system and putting in rules and putting in things in place for students they're teaching them, never put in a rule you can't enforce, and never put in a rule that everyone's going to fail, so everyone's going to have to lie. Because the moment people lie about one rule, they're going to be lying about them all. You put in a very tough limit of 35,000 tons. Yes, you feel good. We have made war unlikely. We've made them all have to have these ships, which will be compromises. Yes, war is not going to happen. We've had the war to end all wars. Ships aren't, it's not going to be a warship anymore. Not going to fighting. No, no, no. You've just made it so that everyone's going to have to lie. Or alternatively, a lot of people are going to get killed. And I'm talking about the people aboard HMS Hood and the people aboard HMS Prince of Wales and the people aboard HMS Repulse. I'm talking about all those ships which get killed because they can't be properly upgraded, because they can't be built to as good as they could be, because of limits which are known to be impractical when they are implemented. They are known to be unviable when they are implemented. That is the reality. So, here are the rules I'm proposing. At no point would any signatory be allowed to build more than a fifth of their total tonnage. They wouldn't allow to have more than a fifth of their total tonnage under construction. So you could save it up, or you could keep up a constant drumbeat. From 1922, signatories could first build to their limit. Then they could replace any ships laid down prior to 1914 with 14-inch or less guns from 1926 onwards. So 4 years further down the road, they could do that. Those with ships with guns greater than 14-inch but laid down prior to 1914 could begin replacing those from 1930 onwards. All ships laid down 1914 to 1918 could be replaced from 1934 onwards. All ships laid down from 1919 to 1922 pre-treaty could be replaced from 1936 onwards, and all treaty-era ships could not be replaced before they reach 18 years of service. I was tempted to put in 20 years, but I decided to make it 18 because I felt it would work better. I felt it'd be fairer to the smaller ships. If you're Japan, you're allowed 14 ships. If you can manage to keep it going at a rate of almost one coming out a year, you keep your infrastructure going, your industry going, and you can sustain it. It's also then easier for people to watch. Everyone feels confident. You're building basically a one-off ship every year. Practically every year. There's about 4 or 5 years in a gap when you're not building a ship, but there again, every ship probably takes about 2 years built, so you never got something under construction. It's pretty much the same for the French and the Italians. Again, with 8 ships, that's 16 years worth of construction if they got one at a time over an 18-year period. Pretty much that means they've got at least one construction yard continually building battleships, and they've got probably got another yard maintaining them, which is good for their infrastructure. That's good. Their infrastructure can support that without worrying too much. That's the other thing I was going on. I was thinking about what's the infrastructure they've got. So this becomes an interesting thing. This is the reality of when we start looking at the limits. What do they get? Now, if you're talking about the 35,000 ton limit, which is the traditionally agreed, it's then there's the 525,000 tons, and this is the US Navy and what happens to them. Now, the first thing I've changed is I've actually had in 1922, I've had Washington completed because I felt she should be completed. And especially as that makes sense because, honestly, they have 840,000 tons as their limit when you have the ability to build 20 42,000-ton ships. Now, they could build 6 42,000-ton ships at that point. They could order 6 in 1922 to build up to tonnage. Well, they couldn't, of course, order 6. They could order 4 at a time, 4, and then they could wait a bit, or they could build them slightly less. By 1926, they'll have space for 10 42,000-ton ships. And by 1930, they'll have space for 12. I can carry on. We go into the Royal Navy, it's 6 again. It's then 11 and then 17. Theoretically. We can go through the same when we look at the Japanese here. They could order between 1922 and 19. They've got 7 ships they can build over this period, and then from 1930 they could build another 4. The point is, they could build ships, and 42,000 tons is a nice amount to have to build with as your standard ship. The same goes for the Italians here. Look at this. They have the ability to basically rebuild their entire fleet if they want to. They could build 35,000-ton ships if they want and get 10 of them, to an extent. Probably not. Probably not, but 9 definitely. They have a lot of capability there. And then we have the French, and it's the same. They have the capability. What is the likely build, though? If they have all those capabilities, what does the likely build become? And this is what I'll be looking at later, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a UAD of what I think a likely 40,000 rough USN build will be versus a 42,000 IJN build, and I'm going to do it in numerically respectful numbers, hopefully. I'm going to try and do a 10v7. But I'm recording this on the Friday, and I'm going to record the UAD video with the stuff in, which is going to be added in on the Saturday, because I'm going to make sure the computer works and make sure it's nice and cool and happy. All the windows are going to be open, lots of fresh air. Anyway, for smaller powers, a 35,000-ton option might still be pursued. After all, Dunkirks were 8,500 tons less than the limit due to infrastructure. So they might go for 35,000 tons. Or if we go back to their limit for the French again, well, their limit is 336,000 tons. Well, you could build 10 ships of 33,600 ton standard displacement. That's still a lot more than a Dunkirk. And that's going to be a capable ship. Let's be honest, that's more than a Nelson and a Romney. They are, well, it's almost a Nelson and Romney. They're 33,800 tons. So it's 200 tons less than Nelson and Romney per ship. For the likes of the RN USN, well, whilst the 35,000 ton ship is not going to stand up to a 42,000 ton ship. It's not for on their requirements. It can do fine for the French or the Italians, possibly in the Mediterranean, under the building under those circumstances. But if you're building it for a world fighting ship, it's not going to be enough. But for both of them, probably a 40,000-ton ship will work. And I could definitely see the RN going for a 40,000-ton ship, because 40 compared to 42, it's probably going to be okay. It's probably going to match up, and it's going to come down to skill of crew and skill of equipment, and British will probably think it is going to be okay, and that allows them 21 ships. Which is important again, because the British would have liked a larger fleet. The British were hoping for... Well, the British wanted more than 15 ships. 15 ships was basically the barest minimum, and only enough to sustain 2 fleets in their perspective, their view. Because their minimum per fleet they wanted was 7 ships. They ideally wanted 3 fleets of 8. So ideally they'd have liked 24 ships. But being able 840,000 tons and being able to get 21 ships would be enough. They could have a 7-ship force based in Trincomalee. They could have their 7-ship base in the Mediterranean and their 7 ships based in the home fleet. And if you think about that, 7 ships. Well, where does that rank in? The US Navy is probably going to have 10 in the Atlantic and 10 in the Pacific, roughly. Well, that's fine. Maybe they have 11, but 10 to 7. Well, that's the 70% again thing. As the Japanese agreed, that's fine. And the British have whatever's in the Mediterranean can come streaming out to help them. So that can even odds up. The French 8 ships, well, that means they have virtually no chance versus the Mediterranean fleet, because it's 8 to 7, but there's also the Atlantic fleet. So that's 8 to 14, and whatever comes out of the Indian Ocean. Yeah, that's fine. And okay, the Japanese to the British, well, that is a superiority, but let's see, it's 14 to 10 against the Americans, and it's 14 to 7 if the British are in the ocean. And if the British just hang around in the ocean long enough for the Mediterranean fleet to show up, well, it could be 14 to 10, 14 to 14, very quickly. In simple terms, it provides for a deterrence and security based on everyone feeling confident they have enough ships. No one feels like they have been undermined. The IJN would go for 42,000-ton standard ships. They would be happy with that. Now, does this stop them pursuing Yamato, etc., and Musashi? Actually, I think possibly it does. Because I often consider those ships a complete overreaction to their perceived weakness of their battle line versus the Royal Navy and the US Navies, because they haven't been allowed to build ships. And if they know everyone's allowed to build ships up to this, and they will know that Britain are building 40,000-ton ships, and the USN is probably building 40,000-ton ships, if they feel their ships are all qualitatively superior individually. And it'll be a case of, right then, so tonnage-wise, we have the 70%. But they have 21 to our 14. So it's really 3 to 2. So everyone feels sort of secure. The Japanese can console themselves that their 14 are better than any 14 of ours. But the fact is we have 7 more. And and we can console ourselves that we have 7 more. This is what I was going for with this treaty when I was trying to design what I would call an equitable treaty. Everyone has to win to an extent. And before people come back to me, and I know this is going to come, oh, they couldn't afford it, there's financial issues, there's this, that. Not to the extent this couldn't be done. I agree, a massive building program of constantly churning out dreadnoughts 5, 6, 7, 8 a year, like they've been doing prior to World War I, probably not sensible for the British. But paying back the debt slightly slower would be it wouldn't be much to fund the capital ship program, but also this is something you've got to think about. If you've got a capital ship program going, you've got a lot of industry going that supports the capital ship program, a lot of research, a lot of development, a lot of ways to put money into the economy, which can help governments when there's a downturn in the economics, because that's the other thing. You've got the ship production going. And this is an example I put together for the IJN program. So, I'm going to expand out, but it's going to be very tiny still, even on this massive screen. We have the super nail rods, because let's be honest, they will be built Nelson or Omni style because they're still limited by infrastructure and limit investments and by displacement. So they're going to be built to the most efficient design possible, which is the all-forward gun design, which means they're going to be 40,000-ton nail rods. You will notice that the longest running ships are Renown or Repulse, and they only disappear from service in 1938, 39 to 40. The Royal Navy would be slowly bringing these ships into service. And that is the reality. They could, before they got rid of any ships, bring in the new ships into service. They could feel the safety. Now, I've started off with the first batches being ordered in batches of 3. That's just because that's how I like it, and then going back down to a 2-ship batch order system. But honestly, I could see it being a 3-2-2-3, 2-2-3 scenario. There are lots of different ways of going, but I think they would start off with 3 batches of 3, mainly because that gives them 9 good new ships in service pretty darn quickly and allows them to get rid of the older 13.5-inch ships quite quickly as well and cover for them. At which point they then start implementing more of a construction. And again, I'm very careful because the Royal Navy's allowed 840,000 tons, and they're allowed about a maximum, this is the point, of a fifth, which is 160,000 tons under construction. So I have managed to keep all those figures of 920,000 tons or below, which means at no point have I maxed out my construction allowance, and at no point have I been over my numbers in terms of total fleet. 840,000 tons tonnage. The difference, of course, is what I've got under construction. And you can see by the time it gets to about 1940 onwards, all the difference is construction. When it's different random numbers, that's some stuff in service. But this would have given the Royal Navy a lot of security. It would have made them feel very confident. It would have made the Royal Navy's infrastructure and the construction infrastructure keep going. It wouldn't have broken the bank. And it would have also meant that Britain and America, because America would probably have followed suit and kept up a similar pace of construction, wouldn't have had a naval race because both would have just been fulfilling their treaty limits. They'd have just been probably matching each other's build year for year within the allowances of Congress. And if you're Germany or if you're Italy and you want to turn around and build your ships, you will know there's no chance, however good you make your ships, of them equaling the Royal Navies. Because that's one of the points that you have to think about. When Hitler's going through Hitler's justifications in his mind, he's looking at Scharnhorst, Gneisenau, Bismarck, Tirpitz, and he's thinking, these are modern ships, these are the best. What's the Royal Navy got? Well, let's be honest, what's the Royal Navy got in World War II? Mostly World War I. Yes, it's upgraded, but most of it's World War I. Hood, Renown, Repulse, the Queen Elizabeths, all 5 of them. The R-Class, all 5 of them. Okay. Oh, We also have Nelson and Rodney. Whoopee-doo. And they're the scary ships, but they are built to a fundamentally flawed design because they are not fast enough to do their job. And these would be fast battleships. The interesting question comes is, does the Royal Navy at some point build a batch of battlecruisers? I have no idea. There is part of me which wonders if in these first batches of 3, if they do build 2 battleships and a battlecruiser variant, 2 battleships and a battlecruiser variant. But I also think they're probably going to build fast battleships. I think that's what they're going to concentrate on with the first batch. First batch, definitely. I think they would be 28 to 30 knot ships at 40,000 tons. And I think they'd be very, very, very successful. Because let's be honest, with 40,000 tons, 9 16-inch guns, if you are able to push it up in a Nelrod form, Nelson, Rodney, G3-ish sort of style form, well, yeah, preferably all forward guns, not the G3 weird extra turret, you would be a pretty successful ship. And you could do that on that. What would the US Navy be doing? Would they be going, well, we'll have slower ships but have more guns? Well, that might be what the US Navy goes. We might see the US Navy just continuing on with sort of South Dakotas, 12, 16-inch guns, but slower. And that might be the faster ships with not less guns but more speed and still massive armor. The Americans will have slower ships with more guns but the same level of armor. And there'll be sort of the divergence of the fleet actions from, the Royal Navy going, well, we don't want to have battle cruisers and battle cruisers at this point because we are only allowed to build one capital ships. They're all grouped in the same tonnage. They're not something extra. So they have to be considered part of the battle line, and we don't want a battle cruiser to have to fight a battleship. But we can build battleships which are fast enough they can outpace pretty much any other battle line. And therefore we can decide when we fight. So, if this would have been an equitable treaty, allowing all sides to feel secure, and to have won enough to go home with pride, why wasn't it the path taken? Well, I'll probably be discussing this more while I'm showing you the video, the UAD stuff, the ships bashing away at each other, but in putting context War 1, that's the war to end all wars, and never again becomes mantra. The logic was, if you don't have weapons, you won't wage war. So, using the information you have to push the hardest you can to achieve the minimum level of armament acceptable was the aim of the day, and that was what they did. But here's the thing. The UK, although often people point to the UK versus the US as a sort of society because we don't have the prevalence of guns, we don't have the gun culture, don't have the gun ownership that you have in America. And that's fine, you can do that in the UK because A, we're an island, so it's slightly easier to control access to things. B, you have the consent of the nation on this, because we have other ways of causing protest. Trust me, the level of sarcasm and the ability of the British to be BLODY minded can achieve a lot against our theoretical overlords. And more importantly, it's the Britain's happily to function that way. You couldn't really enforce that in America because there are a large group of people who don't want to function that way. And also, there are large parts of America where, in the nicest way, there isn't a lot of police. There isn't a lot of civil, lots of the things that we have in the UK which make it work. In the UK, you're never far from being able to call for someone. If you're in trouble, you can call for the police and they will be there. Not that it won't take them that long, relatively, to be there. There are police helicopters and things in remote areas that will get there. You can feel confident of getting the support from the state, which you pay the taxes for. But you can enforce that within a country. You can't enforce that on nation states. Nation states, if they feel aggrieved by it, how are you going to hold them to that standard? This is the other problem with a treaty. You're putting in place a treaty which everyone spoke it was going to hold the voluntary stand, or what? You're going to declare war to enforce the treaty? Is that it? But the whole point of this treaty is to stop a war. So you're either making war inevitable by having to people have to declare war to enforce the treaty, or they're just going to be breaking the treaty, in which case it's not worth the paper it's written on. This treaty, the more and more I look in the Washington Treaty, the more and more I consider it, it is a shining beacon for the people who are pro-peace and arms limitations treaties, and it's possibly the worst arms limitation treaty ever, because it is full of things which are going to make people lie and sow seeds for future war, because everyone goes away feeling scared. And that's the honest truth. Let's be honest, the Royal Navy goes away from this, and not only do they not have enough ships to defend an empire, but theoretically the US Navy are their equals. Now, yeah, they're banking on and proved right that the Congress won't fund that, but that's what they're going away with. US Navy's going away going, we got lumbered with all our old slow ships and we got no new ships. Oh, sugar. And they're not feeling good either. They have one of the slowest battle lines. IJN's going away with going, have you seen our ships? No one's happy. The point is a treaty only works if the parties that agree to it and hold themselves to it. And if they're losers, they're not going to hold themselves to it. So Japan didn't feel secure, and many felt the politicians had fatally undermined them because of their agreement. Ouch. Britain is forced to choose between balancing the empire posturing in Europe, and it manages to hold the line until eventually its bluff is called, and then it doesn't have enough ships. For want of a few more ships. America stopped building, which its infrastructure withered and it hollowed itself out as a fleet. Let's be honest, the US Navy is doing a crash building construction course from basically 1937 to 1941. And in 1941, as I've talked about with the Admiral Kimmel videos, the US Navy is in no way, shape or form really ready for war. They are able to have enough reconnaissance aircraft in Hawaii to cover 60 degrees of the possible attack. Hawaii is an island. You have to cover 360 degrees to be completely secure. You should be at least covering 240, because you should be covering from basically from northeast all the way round to southwest. Because you know the enemy are to your, to the southeast. Because you know the enemy are to your southwest, and that might be likely an attack, but they could always come from the home islands. It's a possibility, so you need to cover up and a bit beyond where they likely to be going. So you need to at least doing 240 degrees. At least 240. 270, 240, that sort of area. France and Italy, well, they didn't really have much in the first place, but honestly, they would have been better if they'd had more. The French might have had some infrastructure. Might have actually had some ships in World War II that could actually, well, let's put it this way. The ships they had in World War II might have been more numerous, and you never know, one of them might have decided to go and join the Allies earlier on. The point is, really, that this treaty, which was supposed to create peace, instead made Britain and America weak, and Japan angry and frightened. And now we're going to go see what, under this treaty's conditions, I think the ships from America and Japan might have looked like. And when you next see me, I'm going to be in a different t-shirt. I'm going to say this now. So enjoy the HMS Belfast t-shirt, because it's going to be different the next time you see me. I'm not going to be in this shirt. And that's going to change to Saturday the 26th of March. There are going to be changes. But I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you've enjoyed this video so far, and I hope you're going to enjoy the UAD stuff next. Take care, thank you, and here comes the UAD. In 2, 1. So it seems only fair to start with what has been causing me the most trouble of the options, and that is the Japanese ship. Because, as I've said before, my strong suspicion is the Japanese would go for 42,000 standard ton ships. And, of course, I can't differentiate standard, etc. versus full load on Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts, which is something actually I'm prepared to work with for something which makes my life as easy as UAD does to do this stuff. Especially as I'm doing this all on a laptop, which, poor thing, if you can hear a whirring noise in the background, it's probably the fans getting ready for what's about to come for it. Because, yes, it is going to be a complete and utter Pacific pow-out, with 5 of these taking on 7 of the American vessels. So I based this, of course, on the Kiis class with their 10 16-inch guns, and I have a strong suspicion the Japanese would have modified design. I think they might have ended up going with treble turrets and 4 of them. There is a reason for that, and that's basically to do with the sheer amount of firepower you get extra versus the weight differential in balancing across a whole 5 turrets. But this is what the Japanese were doing at the time, and this is therefore me trying to keep as close to history as possible. You'll notice I've put the limit at 47,000 tons because I took the 42,000 tons they'd be building up to the standard limit, and then I thought, well, roughly they could take up to 5,000 tons they could claim in things being added on differential between that and full load. If we consider there are ships which are roughly in the 5,000 ton limit, and I'm fairly sure the Japanese, even if they're happy with the treaty, are still going to push it to the absolute envelope. So 47,000 tons seemed to me to be a fair point to come into. And yeah, she looks good. I mean, she's not perfect. I have to admit she has 18 6-inch guns rather than 16 5.5-inch guns, and her guns are probably 16-inch rather than 16.1-inch, i.e. they're not 410mm. But they're close enough, and she has her quad torpedo launchers either side, because she carried 4 torpedoes each. And yeah, this is good. This is a design I am happy with. It's not perfect, but it will do. And before anyone starts going on me, yes, I did have to spend a lot of time finicking around to get this design to work. Yes, she only has 1 funnel, but that's because on this UAD complex they have these things called funnel complexes, which are absolutely freaking amazing. Rather than the sort of funnels in Japan, they have funnel complexes, and they are these really cool graphics. Look at this. That is some cool work and detailing going on there. And honestly, once we go down to the efficiency, you'll notice she doesn't need any more. She's got 100% efficiency with that, and frankly, I'm not going overweight just to be more accurate on the fact that she probably have had a second funnel. So, to my variation on the South Dakota, my Montana, because I like Montana. Now, this was very much more difficult, and I, to an extent, have failed. And when I say to an extent I failed, it's supposed to be 45,000 tons, because mine is 40,000 plus 5,000, roughly, for, because I think the Americans would go for 40,000. They're out by 430 tons. I honestly think the US Navy would have fudged that figure and would have been accepting of it, so I'm not too bothered. But yes, this is the beauty. Now, here is the really interesting thing, because, as we all know, the differential that Japan was basing this off was the idea that as long as they had 70% of what the US Navy had, they were able to offer a strong resistance, and the US Navy might not be able to win. My thinking is the US Navy does the same as the Royal Navy, goes, well, hang on, we can get an extra ship of 40,000 tons, and a 40,000 ton in standard ship is not that much dissimilar to a 42,000 ton in standard ship, that it's going to be at a major disadvantage in a one-on-one fight, but that will mean we can have a 7 as our third. So I've decided to have a battle between 7 and 5. So there are 7 Americans and there are 5 Japanese. Now, please, before anyone starts thinking about this, the main advantage of the Japanese is they can do 30 knots and this thing can do 23. And for me to upgrade its speed, I would have to delete a turret. So I would have to go full Royal Navy, all forward armament, lots of funnels at the back, and let's go ho ho ho. Which again, the US Navy might have ended up doing, and the Japanese Navy might have ended up doing. This is the thing: if they keep building ships in that period, and they notice the Royal Navy are building these ships, which are both fast battleships, and it's to an extent, and arguably, the Japanese were already heading down, thanks to Yuzuru Higaraga, the fast battleship route. For them, especially with their limited number of ships on the treaty, having a battleship or a battle cruiser was not really helpful because that meant it didn't have enough armor to stick in the fight, but didn't have enough speed to do the maneuver style of warfare they needed it to do. So the Japanese were already heading towards the fast battleship concept. I'm fairly sure, as said, with the British, they would have gone for the fast battleship concept if they'd had the spare tonnage. There is always the possibility that they would have gone, you know what, we will add a 4th turret onto our Nelson Rodney, our design and bump it up that way, but I doubt they would. The Americans would want the extra turrets and might be prepared to sacrifice speed for it, but I think both the British and the Japanese would want a healthy amount of speed. I think the British would probably have more armor, so probably less speed. So the British would probably be aiming for roughly 28 knots, and the Japanese would be aiming for 30 knots. Now, the differential between 28 and 30 knots is there, but in the scheme of things, it's probably not going to have a massive impact in a fight, other than maybe allowing the 30-knot ship to get away. Is not really going to be able to dictate the pace of combat, especially if that 28 knots, and if we consider if it's 28 knots, the same as the Nelson and Romneys are theoretically limited to 23 knots, and then you have certain captains put in charge of them who go, you know what, I found an extra 100 horsepower somehow, and we're going even faster. 100 horsepower, did I say? I meant 100,000 horsepower. We're going several knots faster. That sort of scenario. These things can even out, but yeah, this 23 knots. And so the difference is it gets 2 more guns, but it loses 7 knots, and it has 1 less turret. But also, again, of course, it's roughly 2,000 tons less in standard. So those things all add up. Anyway, I still like this ship, though. I might not be as impressed with it as I am with my Japanese ones. I think they look really quite cool. But that's mainly because, honestly, the American superstructures suck. And when I say that, I mean in the nicest way. UAD, you are trying your best, but some of the American superstructure stuff looks really weird, and I'm not a fan of cage mast at all. But I'm putting one in because one appears to be on the South Dakota. So yes, I've had to actually put a cage mast on a ship. So basically, at this point, I really like the look of the ship because you can sort of pretend the cage mast doesn't exist. And if I do this, I really like the ship because I can pretend that completely the cage mast doesn't exist. Look, this is now gorgeous, and I love this ship. Love this ship. Love this ship. Oh, cage mast. Love the ship. 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 Oh, cage mast. Oh, good lord. Yep. So, wish me luck. I'm going into battle, and I'm actually in charge of the Americans. But as usual, I will leave the AI, to try and be fair, I will leave the AI in charge as much as possible, unless it does something completely insane. Now, this is going to be a very, very different battle, in that I have never done one on screen before, which has had this many battleships involved, to my knowledge. I might have done an 8v4, so I might have got close to 12 ships. I'm not sure. I'm trying to remember some of the British battles. British and German, Anglo-German battleship battles. It's going to be interesting. put them all into AI. Make sure you're on avoiding torpedoes. And good luck, my friends. Good luck. You've got 2 free ship divisions. Yeah, I'm joining you into that one. Montana, I have a feeling you would have fought one out on your own. Yep. So they're looking pretty. As again, at this point where you can't see the cage mast, they do look impressive, and this would be sort of a big squadron steaming. Again, if you're America, what's the advantage of going for 21 ships over 20? You could probably base 7 in Hawaii, 7 on your west coast, and 7 in the Atlantic. Match the British in the Atlantic. And have 14, and match the Japanese in the Pacific with 14 sitting out there. So let's call this the Hawaii Squadron. Yes, this is the Hawaii Squadron. The 7 are the battleships of the Hawaii Force. In this world, though, let's hope that Hawaii has actually been properly funded in terms of its defense and has the things it needs to defend itself, i.e. reconnaissance aircraft. Would have made all the difference. Reconnaissance aircraft. Ooh, they're puddling along. Yes, 23 knots, but they seem to be doing quite well. Right then, this is going to be interesting. The armored Japanese existing there, the traditional charge at the enemy, we're going to take them out approach. And of course, again, you're doing a day fight, which is something which is problematic for the the Japanese might well have tried to go for a night fight. So theoretically, there are 84 16-inch guns on the American side versus 50 on the Japanese. So that's 84 to 50 in terms of 16-inch guns. So if I was the Japanese, I would be keeping at maximum dancing range and winding the Americans up right now. I wouldn't be charging for them. But that's what they're doing. Now, of course, the other thing is that if they're in a one-on-one fight, well, the Japanese have the speed to get away, but they don't have the firepower to necessarily win it. But I still don't think this is going to be an easy one for the Americans. I'm not sure. Yeah. There are a lot of shells going backwards and forwards, and a disparity of 30-odd shells on one side. So, 34 more shells being fired per salvo. That can add up. It's the law of large numbers, and it's actually getting a hit. Ooh. But the Japanese aren't really using their speed. And yes, I am sitting over with Japan because I'm avoiding the cage masts. If anyone hasn't realised this, it's true. I'm not exactly keen on the aft mast structure of this one, I have to admit, but UAD have done a very, very good job. And even the cage mast over there, I have to admit, is accurate. It's just I don't like cage masts. Really don't like cage masts. That is some great graphics going on there. Ooh. There is some very interesting shooting going on. This is, of course, all visually guided. There's this pre-radar. I've set this in 1926. So yeah, I've tried to be accurate to what ships they could build in the treaty area. They appear to be doing okay. Let's go to Division 1. Connecticut is okay, a bit strawberry, but okay. North Dakota. North Dakota, what's happened to you? You're on fire. But you're still fighting. I love you, North Dakota. Just don't make me have to look at that cage mast. Yes, you look gorgeous. You look gorgeous now, don't you, North Dakota? I'm not sure what you're doing. The enemy is the other way, but ow! That wasn't nice. I think that was Montana doing that. No, that was Massachusetts. Massachusetts, that was bullying your sister. Massachusetts, that's not fair. That's not what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to be bullying your sister. It's not nice to bash into your sister in the middle of a fight. I have no idea what the AI is doing here. I'm fairly certain at some point I'm going to have an argument with the AI. But, you know, hey-ho, it's trying its best. I'm hoping. I'm hoping it hasn't decided it too doesn't like Cage Moss and is now rigging this against the Americans on point of honor that Cage Moss shall never win a fight. But seeing as I wasn't the one in charge of programming this game, I'm sure that's not been set up. But please tell me if you've done more fighting with Cage Moss if they always lose. If that's the case, then we know that the programmers of UAD have taste, and very good aesthetic taste. Cage Moss are bad. Not particularly massively over keen on the pagoda, but it it works and it has a reason. It's still not a cage mast. Are you not still milling around like something over here, or have you managed to get yourselves into order? Now, I know, I'm usually the one who starts saying things like the Battle of Tsushima and the analysis prior to it based on gun numbers is stupid. And it is stupid, because at Tsushima, the guns were not all the same. But in this fight, everyone has 16-inch guns, everyone has roughly similar levels of technology in terms of range finding, and everyone has, therefore, roughly similar capabilities. They're not that dissimilar. So there again, then numbers of guns, and they're all using them in a similar way, actually starts to have an impact. For example, it's the sheer swarm of shells coming this way that has an impact. It's a case of, wow, we've got so many shells coming towards us. I do find it interesting that Japan, of course, most famous for the 8-8 plan, which was supposed to be 8 battleships and 8 battle cruisers, is almost immediately after they start working that plan, looking at it and going, you know what, actually, we don't need battle cruisers. Battle cruisers are not good for us. We have no ability to reach other people's lines of communication and their commerce at the beginning of a war. By the time we can only reach it after we've already defeated their battle fleets. So therefore, we might as well have fast battleships, because that will give our battle line a decisive advantage, because they'll be so much faster than their opponents. Very good and very sensible thinking. Put the money into your fast battleships. They will reward you with love. Far better investment than houses or ISAs or anything else. Put your money into fast battleships. I'm kidding, of course, and please note, just before anyone starts going, you're giving out financial advice, Dr. Clarke, because you're a doctor. People listen. A, I'm a historian. B, I'm an academic. I spent half my life being broke and the other half trying to figure out what the difference is between a research grant and an actual job employment, and why one seems to qualify me for a pension and the other one doesn't. There is not good financial advice going to be coming from this direction, other than it takes ages to pay off a credit card. As you can see, the Japanese have used their speed to disappear. This was sensible. This fight is going to take a while, because these things are 23 knots. They are lovely, if you can ignore the cage mast. See, look, that looks good. That looks beautiful. See, no cage mast. That looks really good. I'm liking that one. But they are only capable of 23 knots. But this wouldn't worry the Americans in their doctrine in the 1920s, because the whole point was you had the carriers took over the battle cruisers role from Lexington class, and they would find the enemy, and then you would just keep on coming until they couldn't dodge away from you. That was the American idea, and it was a very good idea. And in this case, the Japanese have to come and engage you. And the Americans have got far better armor than the Japanese have. I was very accurate on that one. The Kiis were going to have 11.5 inches of armor, which would have certainly made an argument for HMS Hood being promoted to fast battleship status from battle cruiser. And in contrast, the armor belt on the Dakotas was 13.5 inches. So really, there is a lot of difference in the impact of those extra 2.5 inches. In simple terms, it's the range you are designed around fighting from. The Japanese ships are designed to fight from maximum range, where the guns shouldn't penetrate at the 11 inches. The 13.5 inches armor, well, that allows you to get a lot closer. Okay, I'm starting to wonder if the Japanese know they haven't broken up. I was wondering if they were going to do the thing of coming from using their speed to come from multiple angles, but no, they're sticking doggedly together. See, that's what I would be if I was the Japanese. I'd be using a speed to basically divide the American fire by splitting up and coming from multiple angles. But you know, that's me. I'm mildly evil. And I suppose they do only have 50 ships versus 7, 5 ships versus 7, 50 guns versus 84, so I can understand them keeping together and operating at speed together, but, you know. Oh, good Lord, Montana, what's happened to you, my dear? What has happened to you? Oh. You're 100% floating, but you've only got 70% structural integrity left. What did you get beaten up by? Oh, yeah. It's the cage. What need I ask? It's the cage mast. The cage mast has brought in all the pain to you. Look at that. All the red starts off with the cage mast. It is the cage mast's fault. I was right. Cage masts are terrible. Before anyone starts going, yeah, there's actually structural reasons and sensible things around doing cage mast. I know. I still think they're ugly and don't like them. What are you up to, North Dakota? You okay? You're a good girl, aren't you? Pulling away. Iowa. Kentucky. This is a good group. Connecticut, of course. Bully from earlier. Massachusetts. Such a bully. Smashing into one of your sisters earlier. You didn't even have the good grace to have damage to your bow from doing it. What's happened to your superstructure? You got hit? Poor thing. Poor thing. Now, this is a fight which could certainly take a while, so it's worthwhile, you know, thinking this through as an option. As I've said, it makes sense to go with 42,000 tons, and I realise there are going to be people who, as the limit, who are going to come back and go, well, why not 45,000 tons? Now, if you go with 45,000 tons, you're almost going too high. Because 45,000 tons as a limit gets you to 900,000 tons as over 20 ships, and that's the thing. The real important thing for the Japanese is having that 7-10 ratio. That's going to make the Japanese feel, you know, secure and respected, even if they don't feel equally powerful, and therefore they have to sort of deal with that scenario. So a 7-10 ratio, if you've got 45,000 tons, you're talking 900,000 tons of battleship and that of capital ship, and that is a colossal amount. Again, if we're talking, and you start to get into the issue of, okay, what are we going to be doing? How big a ships are we going to actually build? Because if you build 45,000 ton ones, you have got a maximum of 20. If you build 42,000 ton ones, you can get 21. 43,000 ton ones, you can get probably 21 again. Because 43,000 tons times 21 comes in at 473,000. Comes in at 473 times. Well, I don't know. Comes in at 816. No, you couldn't get that. So 42, yeah, 42,500 tons, you could still get 21. But the point is that would be too much of a victory for the war side as well. That would be too much of a victory for the naval side. That would be seen as being a massive victory. Whereas putting a cap on the warships of 42,000 tons, limiting to that, would be seen as a victory for the peace side, because it would say, you can build hoods, but you can build no further. 45,000 tons says, well, you know what, you can build bigger than a hood. That's not a win for the peace team. And that's the other thing you have to balance. You have to balance the peace side. They have to feel like they're winning something. The people who want control and arms control have to feel like they're winning as well. And 42,000 tons, it represents a win for them. It means people can't build anything bigger than a hood, really. And that's fine. Because really, even the Royal Navy doesn't want to build a hood again at this point. The Royal Navy wants to build something far more efficient for its displacement ratio. And as I said before, the Royal Navy would probably end up going 40,000 ton ships. And okay, maybe the Americans and the Japanese both end up going the 42,000 route. But then the Americans will be allowing the British to have one more ship than them, which might affect their ego. But they also might go, well, hang on, our ships are individually more powerful. Especially if the Americans stuck to a more traditional design layout, 42,000 tons would be a lot easier to build through. Trust me, if I was making this South Dakota design based around 42,000 tons standard, it would all go into extra speed. I don't need much. I don't need any extra armor than they already have. I don't need any extra guns than they already have. I do need some more speed. I'm not sure how much extra 2,000 tons will buy me in terms of speed, but I'm hoping it's enough to make this battle less one-sided. And when I mean one-sided in being able to decide when to fight it. And yes, the advantage of the Americans is they will have fast cruisers, fast destroyers, and lots of them. Which means a battle like this would never really happen in this way. But it does make you think about some of the realities of combat which could have taken place if you had battle lines join. A battle like this is going to be painful for all involved. It's also going to be messy. Rarely have battles in history not been messy. New York is now on fire. I don't know. Neither side's lost a ship yet. I'd say that's because the Americans have armor and the Japanese have speed, and both are dancing around each other. But I'd say I think if anyone's going to go first, it'll be one of the Japanese. Their armor is just interesting to see. As said, if these are fast battleship designs, and compared to them, honestly, Hood is quite well protected. But there again, Hood has less guns and more speed. So it'd be interesting to do a fight between a Key and a Hood and see what happens. I might do that at some point. I'll take my modified UAD Hood out to play and see what happens with a Key. Especially now I've got this design to a point at which I'm happy with it. ultimately, the two designs represent the differences and divergence between the American and the Japanese design philosophy. The Japanese is going for speed and maneuver, on a sort of maneuverist approach to naval warfare, with still some significant, if though less armor, and significant firepower. The American design is maximum firepower, maximum armor. And I do wonder about the 23 knot speed for the South Dakotas. I honestly think they deserved more. And I think to an extent, it's to allow them to sort of cop out when it comes to the Lexington class, because I think the Lexington class can be built better as well in terms of the design. The US Navy and speed in this period seems to be an issue. And in a way, there is a sound reason for that. They are designing their ships around the idea of being able to travel long distances. And high speed and long distance travel are things which can not be mutually exclusive, but can be conflicting in engine design. You want something to go a long way at a steady pace. That requires differences in your turbine design and your engine design than if you want something to be able to go at high speed. In the Royal Navy, this is why you end up with sort of development, and especially also in the US Navy and various other navies, of basically the dual turbine approach in engines, where you have a turbine which is orientated around cruising speed, which often operates on a lower pressure, and then you'll have this smaller turbine next to it, and that's the high pressure turbine. And they shift stuff into that when they want to go a lot faster. It takes a while to get that sort of developed, that sort of technology developed, turbines developed to level of efficiency at which you can have that. And it's useful when you can. Hello, what are you all doing? Are you milling around again? Look, I have to have a conversation with this battle line. Okay, New York, you are as brave as every New Yorker I have ever met. I will say this, you know, there are two groups in this world who will shout loudly, even if they are surrounded by people who are threatening to hurt them. The phrase is "Come on, if you think you're hard enough." They are most of the British, most of Britain and New York. Not sure why those two groups have always struck me as the groups which will shout this, but it is kind of traditional in the UK. It's usually the thing that gets shouted before a big fight breaks out. Come on, if you think you're hard enough. And again, New Yorkers tend to have that attitude, seem to have that attitude as well. So maybe this is what New York is thinking. She's basically going, I'm charging into the Japanese, and it's going to be a case of come on if they think they're hard enough. The Japanese are wisely going, well, we're able to do 30 knots. You're currently doing 23. Actually, currently doing 21.5. We don't need to worry about you. We can keep away from you, but, yeah. Whee! Flying over to Taibo! Hello, Taibo! What are you doing out here? Where are your colleagues? You have been spotted. Ah, there are your colleagues. They're off there. This is very much a realistic naval battle, in that occasionally you lose people, occasionally you miss people completely. I'm waiting for one side to run out of ammunition, because both are currently, I would say, conserving ammunition. 480, 531. Hello, Aki. If they do run out of ammunition, they are both loaded up with 6-inch guns, but the Japanese have torpedoes. I didn't fit the 2 single torpedoes to the my Dakota design, mainly because I couldn't see the point in having a single torpedo when you're up against something which has a broadside of 4 on either side. And also has the armor level of these ships. That might have been a strategic error. This is a fight which would have gone on for a very, very long time, and I have a feeling the destroyers and cruisers milling around might well have been the deciding factor in it. But the important thing, and this is the thing which I'm hoping this battle has demonstrated, is that A, the American 40,000-ton standard design, 40,000-ton standard displacement ships are in no way falling apart versus the Japanese 42,000 ones. But also, the American superiority in numbers and gunfire is not exactly wiping out the Japanese either. Now, this is, of course, reflective on the design. I'm fairly certain if the Americans had gone with a 9-gun design and more speed, well, the scenario could be different, and it might be interesting to take these ships versus the 40,000-ton standard design Nelrod and see what happens. I might well have that do that sort of operation just to see what could take place. I have a feeling their speed coming in roughly in between. They have the speed and armor advantage over these speed and to an extent a bit of an armor advantage over this design, although the Dakotas have more, or rather, my Montanas have more in the way of firepower. So the Montanas will have the same number of guns, although probably equal number of ships involved. The Japanese have been the strange experience of having 1 more gun per ship, less ships overall, so 7-5 again. I'm thinking I'm heading in the right direction. Probably not. But whereas their 5 guns would mount up to 50, the 7 times 9 would be 63 guns overall on the British ships. The British ships would have more armor, and with 28 knots to 30 knots, the Japanese wouldn't be able to run away as quickly as possible. And I have to admit, I was being quite nice given the Japanese 30 knots was, but it's because I couldn't make it 29.75 work as a number of knots for a ship to have. So I went with 30 and just sort of rounded it up. It would be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to do those videos, and I will do that. I will do those videos at some point, doing sort of the Nelrods versus the Kiis and Nelrods versus the Montanas on my designs, just to see what happens. I don't think it's an easy fight for anyone, but the thing is, this does make a far more even playing field. And please note what I mean by that when I'm saying it. They all know they can build decent ships for roughly 40,000 tons. They know they can do it. So there's no one going to feel, oh, we are now restricted, we're going to have to build terrible ships. No. They're all going, yeah. Okay, so we can't use our normal experience of making up for any failings in our design practices by just building a bigger ship. We have to build a really good ship. And it's suddenly going to come down to the quality of the naval constructors you have, the quality of the shipyards you have, of how much they can eke out of that limit. And they're not going to have the ready get-out clause of, well, we're being forced to build something which is so much lighter than we would normally be building. You know, we're limited to 35,000 tons, and that means we have to make dramatic compromises. No, it'd be a case of, right then, we're all building to 42,000 tons or 40,000 tons in standard. You know, I think, as I said, my strong suspicion is the British and Americans both end up doing the 40,000 thing. The Japanese will do the 42,000 thing. The Americans might do the 42,000 thing, but if they do, that's basically saying the Brits are going to get an extra battleship over you. It's also saying you're going with about probably 5 battleship divisions, each of 4 ships, or yeah, it probably makes sense. 5 divisions of 4 ships, or 5 squadrons. And you probably end up with 2 based on the Atlantic coast and 3 in the Pacific Fleet, again. Whereas if you went with 21 ships, you'd be going with 6 free-ship battleship divisions and 3 flagships. And so you'd have, as I said, a squadron based on Hawaii of 7, a squadron based on San Francisco of, well, more San Diego. Probably San Diego, actually, of 7, and yeah, you have 7 more sitting on the Atlantic Fleet going, hello. It does come down sometimes strategy to that, your numbers of ships. And yes, you can point out, well, we could do the same with 20. We could put 6 in Hawaii and 7 in San Diego and 7 in Atlantic. And yes, you can. But if you've got the 21, that gives you parity with the Japanese in terms of ship numbers in the Pacific, which would be important to the Americans, important to their strategic considerations, and parity in the Atlantic with the British. Because the British have 7 in the Atlantic. Yes, the British then have 7 in the Mediterranean as well, but they're in the Mediterranean, and 7 in the Indian Ocean. Oh, good lord, this is going to go on for a while, isn't it? This is going to be a long one. I just realised the timer at the top is counting down. Okay. Yeah, this is possibly already longer than the the battle I uploaded yesterday, and that was my 16th attempt at doing that fight. This is my first attempt at doing this one, and I'm actually quite happy with it because it showed everything I want to show it. So I could leave it going and give you an even longer battle, or I could take it and say this is taught everything I need to know. And at the moment, I think what's going to happen is both sides are going to end up expanding their ammunition and blowing things up ad infinitum. And I will run this again a few times, and if ever there is actually a decisive result before they run out of ammunition, I will make sure it's recorded, and I will make sure that you can all see that result. But yeah, my distinct impression is both sides are going to go back with end up going home with severe damage. But neither side's actually had a win. Interesting enough, if you had 21 versus 14, you would then have 140 16-inch guns if they somehow the Japanese managed to get 21 of the to 14 of these vessels in service, and the Americans, well, they wouldn't have 210, of course. They would have 252 versus 140, which is an advantage of 112 shells per salvo. Which means if you're going, well, you have a 5% chance of hitting something with a shot. That's enough shells to mean that you are getting probably, let's say, 13, between 12 and 13 hits salvo, whereas your opponent is getting, well, about 7. That adds up when you're talking about 16-inch shells hitting. But at the moment, the AI has played this very well on both sides. They've balanced it out. These groups have not allowed themselves to be separated and divided and, able to be in trouble. By keeping together, they've kept their firepower and their position quite strong, even though occasionally they mill around like, I don't know, hens at tea party. And before anyone thinks I'm making any sort of weird jokes about that, I have cousins who live on farms, and yes, some of my little cousins have organised the hens into a tea party. Yes, I have sat at a tea party and pretended to drink tea as well. What you do when you're taking care of your little cousins. Whereas the Japanese force has been doing more of a sinewy snake maneuver, backwards and forwards, as a force which understands torpedoes well would do, and presuming their opponent has torpedoes, probably, because they have torpedoes, so why wouldn't they? And every ship has suffered a level of damage. But none of them have got close enough to be sunk. The BB Kiis, battleship Kiis, is probably the one which has taken the most damage at the head, and yeah. Of course, again, the entire analysis of high-speed dashing in and out changes once you have radar-controlled gunnery, because the whole point about it is that the radar will detect your movement when you're beyond gunnery range and allow the firing solution to be provided and then confirmed by visual if it's daytime, possibly not at nighttime, and then they open fire. And in the case of the British, at both Madam Han and North Cape, and of course Admiral Lee, whenever he gets a chance, they will open fire at as close a range as they can physically get to, so they will devastate you in about the first couple of salvos. But that is night fighting. And now, I think it is time to leave this beautiful battle. I'm going to save it, and I will return to it later. Hello! So, it's changed again. Well, I'm in a different clothing than I was when you saw me last. In the same video, because this is recorded, of course, on Saturday, as I said. It was an interesting fight, and I did end up going with the first of the battles. I ended up running that battle scenario 4 times today. It's been a fun morning. It's been about 6 hours. on UAD, and that is one of the joys of modern history. You can now do these things, but you need to watch them, especially when you have a lovely but nice little sort of Acer laptop as your computer base. Yes, I will be getting the tower fixed, but at the moment, all the money's going on the Haida trip to Canada, which is probably stupid long term, but I love it, and I want to go see Haida, and it's going to be fun, and I'm going to see Haida and Sackville, and I'm going to see all the other ships as well. But let's go through this, the Washington Treaty issues. And I know in the slide and discussions I've already put into this, which I recorded on Friday, I went through all the various points about the Washington Treaty and its issues in terms of capital ships. And that is the point. This is about the capital ships. Will be doing a series, I think, going through the treaties and pointing out what an equitable treaty would have looked like. Because there are issues for everyone. And the overriding thing is that people want peace. And I agree with that. No one hates war more than people who have studied it and understand it. No one hates it. It is a most senseless loss of life you can possibly imagine. I have done a fair number of operations and discussions, including one operation which I did a video about recently, which was a Japanese kamikaze operation from World War II, which was the most senseless waste of life, most pointless operation ever conducted, in my opinion. There is no operation, nothing, which was worse than that. But the point is, I also can tell you, Civi Pacem Parabellum has not been around for the thousands of years it has because it doesn't stand the test of time. Sadly enough, there are nasty people. There are bullies. And some bullies do get to positions of power. I don't believe there is such a thing as countries which are bullies, but there are countries which have governments which are bullies. There are. There are countries which, for better or worse, have governments which are bullies. And bullies tend to only respond to force. And I'm not talking about force as in attacking them, hitting them. No. Think about it. And so I take this down to the playground level because I can explain it at the playground level, but there are people who go, you cannot extrapolate from it. You can to an extent. As long as you bear in mind, as I always do with these things, what the reality is. It's why I go with 42,000 tons, not 45,000 tons, because there is still the peace party who wants nothing. And so you have to give them something. Who are pushing the treaty, who want to get rid. They're not going to accept 45,000 ton ships. They're not going to accept you giving that higher limit. So putting in 42,000 tons and just using the hood as an example is the same what you do with cruisers. Accept that with cruisers. For good or for ill. Go to the playground. I'm a fairly big guy, and I've always been fairly big. I'm lucky. I inherited my mum's father's genes. My beard basically comes from both sides of the family, and I started getting one of those from about the age of 11. It's been a fun life. But I've always been quite broad-shouldered. I've always played rugby. I've always done a fairly large amount of exercise. I know I do have a habit of, if I'm sedentary for a while, I put on the weight, but the moment I start doing exercising, I can take it off. But I'm also always been a geek. I've always been a massive geek. I have been. I love history. I like Warhammer. I like painting models. I like discussing the intricacies of what's happened. I like taking computers apart and putting them back together again. One of the reasons why the tower is taking so long is because my preference is to buy the components, if I stop being gazumped by people doing Bitcoin and all those things, and actually build it myself, because I like that. But that makes you a geek, and that does make you stick out, especially in a boys' school. But I never had much of a trouble with bullies, because I was big. And I realised that. They could call me names, but frankly, that didn't bother me. I had a laptop on my back as a dyslexic from the age of 11. You know, nothing sticks out more than being the only boy in a school of 400, 500 students, and being the only one with a laptop. Being a scholarship kid and the only one with a laptop. You stick out. But I didn't really have much trouble because I was big. And so what did I do? Well, some of my friends, in fact, a lot of my friends I went out of the way to make friends with, were the kids who weren't big and who were also geeky like me and would have got bullied and did get bullied occasionally. But didn't get bullied when they hung around with me. I made sure of it. And I never had to fight. A couple of scuffles as a kid. Nothing much. Because I looked like I could fight. So that meant the bully didn't want to take part. Because bullies like to go for weak targets. Bullies like to go for things which look weak. One of the interesting points about Hawaii, which Admiral Richardson raises and Admiral Kimmel raises, is that, fine, if you want to deploy the Pacific Fleet to Hawaii, that's a perfectly fine thing to do. But if you're going to do it, you need to supply it, because otherwise you look weak. If you just send the ships there, that is not a strength. If you supply the ships and build up a proper base, make sure it's properly protected, has the reconnaissance assets, has the things which actually turn it into a properly functioning forward base and a supported area, then it's going to be a strong, powerful statement. If you don't, it looks weak. It also, to an extent, happens with our self-perception. And this is where this treaty goes wrong. This is where the whole problem of this treaty comes from. It's about self-perception. The moment you are saying to people, you have to build ships which are less capable than the ones you know you can build, or you can't build ships at all, or you're not allowed to build up to the level at which you need to feel secure, i.e. a 10-to-7 ratio, they feel weak. Now, I had friends at school who were a couple of them just as big, just as strong as me. But in one of their cases, they never felt capable to show how smart they were in school because they worried about being picked on. Because they didn't have the same confidence I had. When I say confidence, more likely attitude that I just didn't care. But we'll leave that to one side. Inherited from a grandfather. And the other one, because they didn't perceive themselves as being strong, because they didn't play rugby, because they didn't do those things, because they didn't feel they could. You know, I was a computer geek, a band geek. I played the trombone. I still do. It's a great instrument. And the bass guitar and the drums. Love them all. Rip computers apart. I am walking, talking, massive geek. Latin is my favourite other language outside of English. Sibi pacem parabellum, of course. Those who seek peace should prepare for war. All these things are factors in treaties. We like to pretend that nations do not have personalities. I say there's no nation which is a bully, but it does have governments. Some governments are bullies. Well, nations are governments. And if their government's a bully, they're going to be a bully. If their government is afraid, they're going to act like they're afraid and cornered. If you set up a scenario, and this is the point, if you set up a scenario where people feel weak, they're going to act out from it. If you want a peace treaty which works, you have to provide a way for people to get what they need. One of the biggest problems I have with the nuclear non-proliferation treaties, and I actually support those treaties, but I have a big problem with them, is the way they clamp down on sharing of civil research on power generation. We know that the reactors you need to make suitable material for weapons are not the same as the reactors you need or the reactors you can make for power generation. Now, if we had followed a policy of allowing people and encouraging power generation reactors and development of that, we would have a world which was far less dependent upon fossil fuels, far less dependent upon those issues, and far more energy sufficient within individual countries. Going for a blanket no has led us to the scenario where we are a world dependent upon fossil fuels supplied by countries which we may or may not like. And people go, well, we should have solar power or wind or any other renewables. I love that. That's fine. But the thing is, we could have had the nuclear power for the last 40, 50 years. The hydropower was the only really sustainable one in that period. So the nations which have large hydropower stations, i.e. dams, have an advantage in their energy security. They do. But we have set this up. We have created this scenario. And we have to acknowledge we do. And it's the same with the Washington Treaty. We set a scenario is created by people who had nothing but good intentions. And that's important to understand. They had nothing but good intentions. But it was an untenable scenario. Because they thought the way to control the situation was to make everyone feel weak. Everyone not have the weapons they needed to defend themselves. Everyone not have the industry they needed to defend themselves. Because it doesn't take a prize-winning economist to figure out, hang on, if you stop all battleship and battleship construction, then the infrastructure and industry which builds those things is going to disappear. Unless you buy it and maintain it yourself as a government, which if you're not going to do, is not going to happen. So that's what you have to think. If the industry is going to disappear, and if the industry and infrastructure disappears, it's going to make it far more difficult for you to build it up again in the future, which is going to put you in a problem. Yeah. The whole point when I was going through this treaty and I was coming up with what I would do if I was the British, 40,000 tons allows a steady drumbeat of construction. It allows a steady drumbeat of construction. Okay, yes, we've got 3 ships over only a 2-year period in the first 6 years. And then it's 2 ships every 2 years. That's fine. It's not going to cause the British any trouble. Anything over runs, they've got a maximum of 4 in production. That's not going to cause them any trouble. They're allowed that. It's not going to break the bank either. And it's not going to make America upset or worried because they can do exactly the same. So instead of you having a treaty where everyone feels weak, where the Americans are sitting looking at the British and going, well, you have Nelson and Rodney, who are probably about the same speed as our ships, but they are very efficient designs. And you have all those fast ships. Okay. And the Japanese have nothing but relics in many ways. They have their historical things. You know, this is the point that comes in is if we go to these various statements, the Japanese, if you put it through the spare tonnage ratio on my 42,000 ton limit, they could build 7 ships. That'd be useful. But they couldn't build them all at the time, because remember, they're only allowed a 5th at once. So they could build a maximum of 3 at a time, or probably 2. That'd be fine. So 2, that's about 8 years to build up to get into numbers, and by the time they're they're already into 1926, where all less than 14-inch can go. Well, that's still carrying on. 1930, oh, and now they can get rid of a lot more ships. So they could have kept a steady drumbeat of 2 ships a year if they'd wanted to for that period. The Americans could match the British. Those figures are not that dissimilar that the Americans could not match the British for construction. Probably not the initial 333, but the Americans already get Washington completed as part of this one, so they get that in there. They might choose still not to complete Washington. They might do, but I'd say Washington's a fairly decent ship as it's designed. You have an issue when you have a treaty which doesn't give you not equality, because believe it or not, equality of outcome doesn't work in treaties either. There will always be differences in the outcome for a treaty. But a treaty which does not give you an equitable outcome, i.e., it's equally of value to you within your proportion. The Washington Naval Treaty starts off a stream of 3 treaties, each one getting progressively worse. Each one getting progressively more problematic and requiring even more and more creative assessments from the constructors of those nations' navies involved to try and build ships which can actually hold water. We always point out the cruisers with the Japanese, the fact that they basically almost start lying on their cruisers from get-go. And as I've said before, the thing that annoys me about them is they lie, but they don't lie well enough. They basically, if you're going to lie, you might as well lie properly and get something decent, not lie and get something half decent. Well, if the Japanese are able to build 40,000-ton battleships, 42,000-ton standard displacement battleships, yeah, that'd probably lie. Yeah, that'd probably be more like 43, 44,000 tons. But the thing is, they probably won't be lying as much when it comes to their cruisers, because instead of the cruisers being the necessary the thing they can build that can actually maybe assist them in their battle line and in their fighting, they're going to have good battleships they can build. And yes, the cruisers will still probably fulfill that role to an extent, but they'll be less under the pressure to do so. And because it becomes easier for them to keep to the treaty, that makes the treaty more bearable, but also makes them more committed to the treaty, because keeping to the treaty keeps others to the treaty, and that's an advantage for them. If they're not able to build any battleships, then they have no incentive to keep to the treaty, because they're automatically at a disadvantage. If they're able to build something, well, then they have a reason to keep to the treaty. And I can understand, and I know I've probably said this several times in different ways in this talk, but I can understand what was going through the people who wanted peace and never again to have war going through their minds when they were building this treaty, when they were putting it together. I can understand these things. It's a dream. It's something which we all would love to aspire to, but reality is they won too well. their rhetoric, their use of intelligence, as in spying, and other advantages they built into the program for them gave them far too much of an advantage. And that meant there was no chance of the victory actually being permanent. Because if you've made a treaty which is so much won by one faction that all the other factions have to lie to be able to operate, you've lost. The moment people start lying about treaties, the moment they start lying consistently, the treaty is permanently undermined. Because either you end up in a scenario where people end up leaving the treaties because it's unenforceable, and remember, as I've said before, the only way you could enforce this treaty on nation states is if either they agree to being enforced it and hold themselves accountable to it, or if you declare war over it. And the whole point of this treaty is it's supposed to bring peace. So if you have to declare war to enforce it, it's probably a terrible treaty in the first place. You've made a treaty system which is fundamentally going to undermine everyone. And the Americans stick to it because in many ways they have to, because they're the ones who pushed it, created it, so they're held to its standard even more. But come on, as it's been over before, the British start cheating almost from the get-go. And yes, the British cheat in the way that the treaty's written, by making sure they read the text and they have all sorts of advantages baked in that way. And especially once the treaties are written by the British in London treaties. Yeah, there are great advantages baked in there. But the thing is, they're never going to get past that original writing of the Washington Treaty and the original problems sewn into it by the Washington Treaty. So yeah. I'm going to go through the whole series of, I'm going to go through cruisers, carriers, and sort of talk about them when I can. Of course, carriers, I don't have a program like UAD I can use. Again, do that. Poor laptop would probably die if the only version of I can think of a carrier building program I could potentially use. But this is the reality. They made a system which was supposed to bring about peace. And that idea was that you bring about peace by making everyone weak. And in reality, the longest run of peace the world has ever known was brought about when everyone felt strong. And everyone felt that they had to respect each other because everyone was strong. Which is a scary thing to think about. Sivi Passam Parabellum. And I realize this channel is probably speaking to the converted already. But who knows? Perhaps it might make some people think who have already got that idea. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it's been a rather long one, and is put together from several different points. What have we got coming up? Well, tomorrow it's going to be a la Argentina. And yeah, we've got York, Exeter, and the Canaries class coming up next week. Sort of it's going out on Monday. Tomorrow's Argentina. Next week is Exeter, and Canaries class. And we've also got the Leipzig class coming up, of the Reichsmarine. And Duskensin of the Marine Nationale. And then it's the Sentinel class. Then we're into May. And June. Well, June's going to be an interesting one. June is going to be an interesting one. Mainly because, and I do find this funny, the first one in June is, of course, the 7th. because the last one is the 31st of May. I'm going to also probably change around the not do the lives in the first couple of weeks of June. I'm fairly sure the 2nd and 9th I'm going to be busy for. I might do the 2nd. It might be at a different point. The 9th of June I'm definitely planning to be busy for. Because I'm going to be in Canada. Hyder trip. Hyder and every other ship I can see trip. Going to be announcing some details as we get closer to the time and things, and I'd love to see as many people who are interested in seeing me when I'm out there and having a chat. I always like chatting with you. Take care, thank you, and